Hey everybody, church. There's a verse in the Bible that says you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar people. I always like that peculiar people thing. Although it took me a long time for me to accept and fall in love with my weirdness. I tried to transform, I tried to conform myself, I tried to fit in, but eventually I grew up, threw on the pink glasses and said, I gotta be me. Now, there's something really cool about being a peculiar person with a chosen family who loves me as me. And that's what Everybody Church is all about. We're here to love you as you and to celebrate you as the beautiful one and only you. That verse goes on to say that we're called out of darkness, the darkness of fear and failure and doubt, into marvelous light, illumination, understanding. That's what today's conversation starter is about. Ray Waters is going to talk about a radiance that does not dim. Grab the popcorn and let's have church.
Well, hello, Everybody Church. I'm glad you are joining us, and I'm really excited to get to bring the conversation starter today. I just throw this out to you because I have realized this has been true for me. Some of the conversation starters have been so rich in content that I have listened to them, and then I have gone back and listened again. A couple of weeks ago, Stan did one on forgiveness, on the Joseph story. And I've listened to that thing 3 times, every time picking up something a little bit different. So it's kind of cool to make a mental mark in your mind. These are saved at Facebook, on the Everybody Church page on Facebook. They're also on YouTube, and they're on everybodychurch.com. So you can go and find these talks, listen to them again, and pick up a lot of content that maybe you've missed. I'm excited about today. I think it's going to be real helpful. It's going to be a good conversation starter, so let's jump in. The story goes that Moses had been on the mountain in God's presence for 40 days and 40 nights. Now, this had not been his first trip up Mount Sinai. At his previous trip, if you remember the story, God actually wrote on tablets the 10 commandments, gave them to Moses. You remember the story? Moses comes down and he sees the people are worshiping a golden calf, and Moses is so distraught he breaks the tablets. I've often wondered right in the moment of throwing those tablets down if it maybe registered with him, these are important, maybe I shouldn't do this. But anyway, he did, and what's he going to do? Well, he gets invited up for another meeting. This time on the mountain, God wasn't writing anything down. Moses is having to take transcription, I'm guessing, and he did. And he brought down some new tablets back down the mountain to the people who this time were waiting anxiously for his return. I'm going to be reading a text from Exodus chapter 34, verses 29 and 30. This is how the story is recorded. When Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 2 tablets of the covenant law in his hands, he was not aware that his face was radiant because he had spoken with the Lord. When Aaron and all the Israelites saw Moses, his face was radiant, and they were afraid to come near him. And now verse 33. When Moses finished speaking to them, he put a veil over his face. Interesting story. Now, second reading. This is from the New Testament. The Apostle Paul picks up this same story in his second letter to the Corinthians, and then Paul practices midrash. That means Paul is going to do rabbinic commentary on this text we just read about the veiled face. Paul is going to give us some insight to this, and this was his insight. 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 13 and 14, and I'm reading from the Message, which is a paraphrase. Paul says, Moses wore a veil so the children of Israel wouldn't notice that the glory was fading away. And they didn't notice. They didn't notice it then, and they don't notice it now. They don't notice that there is nothing left behind that veil. And Paul would continue in his writing, and he would say, that's the way it is with old religion. Paul argues that however glorious its origins, religion based on rules and laws cannot bring a long-lasting shine to a person's face. To Paul, the glory experienced by Moses had faded away. But now Paul is going to say there is a new way, a Jesus way, a Spirit-led way, and that way will transform people literally into vessels of love. And that vessel of love, that never, ever fades. That is a brilliance that never goes away. In other words, Paul would say we can live our lives radiant, we can live our lives beaming, glowing, luminous, incandescent, bright, even brilliant. And the shine in us doesn't have to ever dim. So today in this conversation starter, this is what I want to do. I want to talk to you about old religion that has faded, and I want to talk to you about a new understanding of Christianity that I think is brilliant, that I believe is shining from the inside out. I think it'll be very helpful for us, and I'm glad that you're with us today. Had you known me back in the 1970s, 1980s, I would have told you I love the old-time religion, and I did. I started attending church when I was 13 years old. I remember my dad coming to us and saying, "We're going to start going to church tomorrow morning." And I didn't understand that mom and dad were fighting and they were heading towards divorce, and so this was kind of a last attempt to keep the family together. And so anyway, we got up on Sunday morning and we lived in the suburbs of Atlanta, but we actually went to kind of a country church in Jonesboro, Georgia, Country Baptist Church, and I fell in love with church from day one. I wish I could tell you that mom and dad's problems all worked out and they've been happily married. Well, they're happily married, but they're happily married to two different people because the marriage didn't work out. But I loved church. I loved it. A little girl came up to me the first Sunday I was there and she said, "We have youth choir practice Sunday afternoons at 5 o'clock. Would you like to come?" And I said, "Oh my gosh, yes." And didn't know that I would like music as much as I did, but that was kind of my introduction to that. I was introduced to a lot of sweet, nice kids, and church became very special to me. Our pastor was a country guy, wore overalls Monday through Saturday, and then he'd wear a suit on Sunday. Sometimes he would stumble over reading the scriptures, which we kind of laugh, which was sad we would do that as kids, but he was just a sweetheart of a guy, loud personality. In school when you get that chance to go work with an adult once a year, I guess every year when I was given the choice, I would always go do that career day. I would go do it with Preacher Foster because I just loved Preacher Foster very much. And I liked it. I liked it so much that by the time I was 16 years old, I kind of had a sense that I was going to be a preacher. I began to tell people that's what I felt like I was going to do. And had you met me during those days, you would have said that boy has a certain shine about him. I went to college and graduate school, and then I pastored 3 Southern Baptist churches. Then I started an interdenominational church south of Atlanta called the Village Church. But over time, what once had been this bright light in me that was just so happy, it began to dim. Things began to change. Church seemed to be more what we were against than what we were for. I sensed less and less empathy from people who said they were followers of Jesus, who had said, "Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you," but I couldn't find empathy as something that was really consistent in the people I was around all the time. It seemed to me more about believing a set of propositional truths than really being on a spiritual journey that was vibrant. And I began to feel a little bit like Moses with a veil over my face. It is hard to stand up in front of people every week when you feel whatever light you maybe had in you has dimmed, but that's exactly where I was. Thankfully, some wonderful people came into my life. Most of them came to me through books they had written. Some came to me through sermons that I would listen to. Tony and Peggy Campolo. I had heard Tony preach as a young man, and he stirred in me something. He seemed so real. But then I had an opportunity to spend 3 days with them, and they were so real, and their faith was so vibrant, and they talked about things in a different kind of way. That stirred in me. There was a man by the name of Brian McLaren. Anything Brian McLaren has ever written, please get it and read it. It stirred in me. It was a fresh, new understanding of spirituality, of Christianity I didn't know anything about. Richard Rohr, he's a wonderful writer. He's a Franciscan priest. But I began to read him, and he did something inside of me. And then someone maybe you've heard about, Stan Mitchell. I began to listen to Stan's sermons I had never heard, teaching the way he was doing it. And I began to feel a brightness coming back alive in me. It had lied dormant for a long time. It had been dead, really. But I began to feel something happening, and I'm so glad it did. I'm so glad that I can walk in a faith that recognizes God and appreciates the beautiful story of Jesus, and I can feel in me a brightness that is so different from the brightness I knew as a young person that had dimmed for me. I've now been on this journey for 15 years, and I am feeling each and every day kind of the newness of what that means. And that's what I want to talk to us all about old religion that fades and about this new understanding of spirituality or Christianity that provides for us a real spark. So you ready? Let me first say this: a religion that focuses on believing right dogma above all else ultimately will lose its radiance. The shine comes when following Jesus becomes a way of life. I grew up in a background where it was all about checking the right boxes. Did you pray the right prayer? Did you say it the right way? Were you baptized in the right form? Do you believe the right understanding of the return of Jesus? Do you believe that it's going to happen in a certain way? And if you believe differently, then you're really out. If you didn't believe in a literal 6,000-year-old creation, if you didn't believe the creation story from Genesis as a literal story 6,000 years ago, then you're out. That's the background I grew up in. That was the most important thing. But over time, I began to feel more connected to people who cared about others and maybe didn't check all the right boxes, but they seemed to really care about marginalized people. They cared about people who were suffering. They wanted their life to make a difference. They seemed to be compassionate. They seemed to be empathetic. Those were people I really resonated with. I don't want you to hear this as a political endorsement, because it is not a political endorsement, but I agree with the sentiments Cory Booker stated, who's the senator for New Jersey and running for president now. He said this: "I'll take an atheist who serves over a person who prays to God, preaches of God, celebrates God, but fails to serve mankind." And I realize the very same thing is true. Just checking the right boxes in someone's understanding of correct dogma is not where it's at. Jesus never said, "Come and learn the right answers to the questions so you can make 100 on the test and then you can go to heaven." He never said that. You know what he said? Lek hakarai. Come, follow me. See how I deal with people. See how I am compassionate for the marginalized. See how I care for the poor. See how I talk to the people no one else will talk to. Follow my way of living, not check all the right boxes. You got that one? All right, second conversation starter I want you to think about, in this idea of old religion fading, new religion and understanding is a light that will continually shine. Any religion that is based on fear ultimately will lead to darkness. Radiance comes when we understand we are accepted and loved by God. My path was a fear path. I remember as a young boy that fear of death. At a real critical age in my life, both Martin Luther King Jr. and Bobby Kennedy, they were both assassinated close together. And I remember as a child watching TV and thinking, oh my gosh, this is my first encounter with people talking about death, and it scared me. And then I started going to church as a 13-year-old, and the preacher, when he would talk about death, he would talk about hell, and I would hear these guest preachers come in and they would preach about hell, and it scared me so much. And then I finally did what they said to do. They said, if you walk down the aisle and pray, then you won't have to be afraid anymore. And so I walked down the aisle and I prayed, but I was still afraid. I wasn't afraid for me anymore because I thought I had prayed the prayer, and so therefore I was okay. I began to pray for everybody that I knew. I would go to school and I just wanted everybody to come to my church because I was afraid for them. It even got so bad, I became a pastor. I actually pastored 3 Southern Baptist churches. My first church I pastored at 19 years old. For that whole time I was there, which was about 2 years, I couldn't sleep on Saturday nights because of fear that if I didn't say the message exactly right, somebody was going to be sitting in our service for the only time. They were going to miss the message. They were going to leave church, get hit by a truck. They were going to die. They were going to go spend eternity in hell, and it was going to be my fault. Can you imagine that? Then finally, after years and years and years, I began to read that verse in the epistle of John where it says, God is love. And then I read in the Bible where it says, perfect love cast out fear. And I began to think about Jesus, who said, I am the image of what God is like. Look at me. If you want to see what God is like, look at me. And I saw in Jesus someone who never returned evil with evil, but always returned evil with good. I saw in Jesus someone who said, you forgive over and over and over again, you forgive. And I began to think, God is not someone we have to be afraid of. I do know this, fear of God does lead to a sense of duty, I guess, but fear of God never leads to genuine love. When I began to see God as truly loving, at his core loving, that freed me, and that was a beautiful thing. So religion that is fear-based, that won't last as far as a glow. A religion that's love-based, that is a big deal and changes everything. Another thing I've learned about spirituality that really shines is this. A fading religion is one that makes the main thing the following of certain behaviors, codes, rules, regulations. The real shine comes when we make a difference in the world with our lives. The Jewish leaders, the temple leaders, they made it all about the codes. They made it all about the tithes. They made it all about sacrifices. They made it all about the offerings. There was this beautiful tension in the Old Testament because the prophets would come along and the prophets said the exact opposite. They said, you're spending so much time on sacrifices and offerings and tithes. And they would say, that's not what God wants. What God wants from you is love. What God wants from you is to be kind to the immigrant, to the foreigner. What God wants from you is to act justly, to show mercy, to be humble. That's what God wants, and you're getting it all twisted up. Then Jesus comes along, and Jesus' very first sermon, and he quoted from Isaiah. He said, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He set me to proclaim release to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. And he said, this day, what you have just read is fulfilled in your midst. In other words, I'm going to be setting people free. I'm going to be elevating the captives, lifting them up. And the townspeople were so shook by him saying that, they chased him out of town and tried to chase him off a cliff. But he was saying it's not about codes. It's not about keeping rules and regulations. It's about really loving people and making a difference in this world. That's what it's about. Jesus was all about shaking up social norms as he served hurting people. He rejected racism and sexism. You know how? Watch him meet with a Samaritan woman in John chapter 4. Nobody would have done that. No healthy rabbi would have been talking to a woman, but Jesus did. He dignified second-class citizens. Listen to him tell the story of a man wounded on the side of the road. The priest didn't help him. The Levi didn't help him. You know who helped him? Of course you do. The Samaritan helped him. One of the lowest thought of people in society. I imagine if Jesus were telling the story now in South Georgia, I would imagine he would have a bunch of white people around and he would be telling them this story about a poor man that fell in the ditch, beaten up by thieves and robbers. And he would say, you know what? The pastor of the First Baptist Church walked by, didn't help him. Pastor of the First Pentecostal Church walked by, didn't help him. Pastor of the priest of the Catholic Church walked by, didn't help him. But I can hear Jesus saying, then a Muslim man walked by. And the Muslim man got down in the ditch, picked him up, nursed him, took him to a hospital, paid the bill. And then Jesus would say, who is the neighbor? If being a neighbor is a big deal, who is the neighbor? Who was a good neighbor? And we'd all have to say it was the Muslim man. Yet Jesus shook things up. It wasn't about codes. It wasn't about keeping all the rules. It was about this love for people. He risked his reputation to be with people who were thought to be socially outcast. They said of him, he eats with sinners. He hangs out with the drunks. We see him with prostitutes. He didn't care. He challenged unjust behavior. He confronted the spiritually arrogant. He reordered the political world. He advocated for the poor. His life's mission, and he said it all the time, was to release the oppressed, to help set captives free. And he taught very clearly, whatever you do to anyone, you treat them like you'd want to be treated yourself. That was a big deal. That's what he did every day. And then Matthew 25, do you remember what he said? He said the litmus test of worthwhile religion would be how people responded to those in need. He said, I was hungry, thirsty, stranger, naked, sick, in prison, and you helped me. You came to me. And they said, when did we see you in those conditions and come to you? And he said, when you did it unto the least of these, you were doing it unto me. Jesus was really clear. It's not about a code. It's not about rules and regulations. It's about life. It's about helping the unfortunate. It's about coming to those who need to be lifted up. It's about the underprivileged, the marginalized. He said it over and over again. The early church, they understood this. Early Christians were activists. They really tried to help people. They cared for the poor. They cared for the sick. They rescued children. They were known for their compassion and their kindness. I love this quote. Father Gregory Boyle said this, compassion starts when we stand in awe at what the poor have to carry rather than in judgment at how they carry it. Sadly, I think I was probably in a background that made fun more of how they carried it or mocked them for not doing better instead of standing in awe at what they were doing with so little. I never knew that I should be championing women's rights. I never knew that. My wife has become quite the activist. Her name is Jane. I hope you'll get to know her. She is the most lovely person I know on the planet. The last couple of years, she has begun to go to marches and activist meetings. And I say, honey, why are you doing this? And she has teared up and she has said, because we have 2 granddaughters. And I want those little girls to know that their Mimi really, really cares and loves them very much. The idea is we are supposed to try to make a difference in our world. That's where the gleam comes from. That's where the brilliance and radiance comes from. I believe this, we are never more like God than when we identify with and help alleviate suffering for the poor, and you stand with the underdog. Another learning is any religion that discriminates against a person's race or sexual orientation or gender identity is in darkness. Radiance comes when we build a bigger table to include every wonderfully diverse person we know. I learned as an adult that the church I grew up in, prior to me going there, but it was really right before I started going there, that a black family, African-American family, had come to the door of our church, and some of the deacons had met them there and said, you're not welcomed here. Can you believe that? These were men that I knew. Later, I would know them as deacons in the church. It reminded me of a story I remember hearing of a black man that tried to go to church, and same thing happened. He was met at the door and said, your people aren't welcomed here. And he had gone down by the church and was sitting on a creek bank, and he was crying. He was really sad. And Jesus happened upon him, and Jesus said, what's wrong? Why are you crying? And the man said, well, Lord, I wanted to get into that church, but they wouldn't let me in. And Jesus said, listen, don't sweat it. I've been trying to get into that church for 40 years. They won't let me in either. It's that way a lot, isn't it? Sometimes churches have this way of putting up walls and saying, we don't want those people in. That's really, really sad. We know that our LGBTQ brothers and sisters, our family, our siblings, do you know they're discriminated against all the time? We have a wonderful couple in our church, Jessica and Amanda, and they've got a 3-year-old son named Connor. And we were with them. My wife and I had dinner with them a week ago, and they were talking about, they were so excited. There was this big church, and you would know the name of the church. It's a beautiful, contemporary, best children's ministry. I mean, it's like Disneyland. You go to that children's ministry, and any child that ever goes there never wants to go anywhere else except go to church because it's so awesome. And they were told, this church welcomes everybody. You're all welcome. We want you. You'll never feel anything but love and acceptance from you. And then they put an appeal out. They wanted to recruit people for a missions trip in Central America. Amanda is a firefighter, And she said, I can get off and I can make this a part of my life. I want to go on this missions trip. And so she went down to sign up and she was told, unless you can check that you're not LGBTQ, you can't do it. And then they tried to get into a couples group because it's just this young couple, these two ladies, they're precious, but they were told, no, if you're a lesbian couple, you can't be in a couple small group. You can be in a single small group, but we won't put you in a couple small group. And then finally, there was an appeal for ninth grade teachers for girls, but they had to make a 4-year commitment. But Jessica, who is a delightful, spirit-filled lady, she's just beautiful, she wanted to go down and volunteer to be a teacher. They said, you'll teach them in 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade. You will basically help raise these girls, and you'll be so important to them. And so she went to the little breakout meeting to find out how she could do it because this was going to be so important to her. And at the end of that meeting, when she was ready to sign on the dotted line, they said, sorry, your orientation, you can't do it. We cannot have you as a lesbian teaching 9th grade girls. A church that is presenting one thing and then doing another thing like that is hurtful to people. And I'm telling you, a religion like that, that's based like that, it will not shine long. It may appear to be shining, but it is not a radiance that comes from God. I believe the message that comes from God is a message that says, build a bigger table. Build a bigger table. Welcome all of my children to sit there. And really, there's no excuse. We know too much now. We know we have had too long to be able to see what kind of people LGBTQI brothers and sisters are. We know that they are beautiful people created by God. We know that the Spirit is in them. We know that they love God. They are every bit as good as anybody in the world is. So there's no excuse. A religion that tries to keep them out is a religion that will not shine. It will not shine. Radiance comes when you say, sit at our table. Let's all sit at the table together. That is so critically important. I want to close with one more thing because I think it's really important. The divine glow comes when we realize life may be tough sometimes, but if we don't quit and we keep loving, we will see a better world for all people, and we will know we played a small part in it, just a small part in it. I just want to say this to you, everybody, church. I thank you for listening to the conversation starter, but I want you to know something. You have a shine in you. When I see you write little comments about how the church has meant something to you, or you've shared it with a friend, or just something has kind of stimulated something in you, you have a brightness in you that is divine, and it is beautiful. And I'm so proud to get to be a part of something together with you. The Apostle Paul said to the church at Philippi, he said, you shine like the stars in the heavens. And I think you shine like stars in the heavens. And I'm so excited to be on this journey with you. I hope the conversation starter gets you going. Thanks so much for listening. Can't wait to see you next week. Have a beautiful, beautiful week, and let that light shine.
Hello, I've been waiting for you. I didn't know if you'd recognize my voice, 'cause I've been whispering your name again and again. I've been imagining this day, and I'll never be the same. Welcome home. Welcome home. It's so good to see your face. Welcome home. We dance, sometimes only fall. Oh, we see, oh, even when there are no words. And I hope love lifts you up again and again. And if you ever lose your way, let me be the first to say, welcome home, welcome home. It's so good to see your face. Welcome home. Come inside from the cold and rest your weary soul. You belong, you are loved, you are wanted, you are not alone. And I've missed you so. Welcome home. Welcome home. Without you here, it's not the same. I've been waiting here. Welcome home.
Welcome home. I hope Everybody Church feels like home to you. If we're doing it right, then it starts when the conversation starter ends. Now we come together on facebook.com/everybodychurch, and we're here to support each other and help each other get through a complicated, stressful life and a stressful week until we're here next week, next Sunday night, to be together again for another conversation starter. But really, it's the in-between stuff that really matters. I hope that you're connecting with each other and making friends. These friendships are real. Online connections are real. And the people that you meet here will be the people that get you through the complicated, crappy bits of life. We love you, and we hope that you feel that and that you know that and that you know that this community is here for you. If we can help, let us know. You can help us by giving at everybodychurch.com/give. We've got a big vision about growing this community, and we can't do it without you. We love you, and we hope you have a fantastic, awesome, light, and love-filled week.
All of the people around us, they say